Hello, good evening, and welcome. I'm Simon Bestwick.
And I'm Gemma Files, and this, of course, is No Darkness,
Darkness,
but ours.
but ours. So, welcome to the second part of our podcast about David Rudkin's visionary folk horror classic, Penda's Fen. In the first episode, we talked about how the teenage protagonist, Stephen Franklin, experiences a series of visions and revelations that ultimately disprove everything he believes about himself. Central to that, as we talked about last week, is his recognition of his own sexuality. In this episode, we're going to look at how his other certainties are also undermined, as we discuss the film's religious and social themes.
It's interesting because that thing about, pagan being from the village, and his dad later saying, perhaps that's the way that man will save himself, that humankind will save itself, is to, go back to the village, to think of ourselves as part of the landscape and interacting with it and interacting with each other and accepting each other. And I gotta say that, the scale is human. And I gotta say that on a human scale, this is something that I've often thought of because my son, that, back in the day, you might say, oh, well, Cal is daft, or, Cal was taken away by the fairies or whatever, but, nobody, but at a village scale, it's far more likely that you just accept that people are different, that people, it's like, well, so-and-so, oh, he'll never get a wife, that one.
I was reading a discussion of this somewhere where, one of the theories that, because obviously people always say, one thing you often hear is, well, why is there so much autism around now? And of course, it's always been here. It just wasn't. It wasn't. It was explained differently as so and so's daft, or the changeling myth could quite possibly have come out from that as well. Whereas this child doesn't behave like a normal child.
Exactly. But sometimes you find out that your abnormal child can do something that you can't do, and it's useful. It's like Cal's incredibly good at picking up how to play a tune, or Hugh's incredibly good at picking wheat out of flax.
But another theory that I came across, which was that a lot of stuff that is very triggering to people with autism is far more prevalent in a modern industrialized technology. There's far more loud noises, bright flashing lights, and it's much easier in a rural setting, in the context of a farm or something, to do simple repetitive tasks over and over, which is repetition and routine, which are very appealing. So it's not even necessarily that it wasn't being wrongly diagnosed. In many cases, it didn't become an issue for a lot of people on the spectrum because they just weren't finding themselves in circumstances most of the time that actually caused caused that neurodivergence to sort of kind of react.
And similarly, does it super matter if everybody in town is heterosexual? It's like enough people are having sex and enough people are having kids on a village level. It's like it's inevitably going to happen. And so if you have an uncle who doesn't seem super interested, or an aunt who doesn't seem super interested, then at least you have some older people who can look after other people's kids if they want to.
There's always been that thing. I mean, there was actually apparently I can't remember. There was to be a whole bunch of different terms for an unmarried woman. Like a spinster was if you were 30 or something, and then it got into something like thornback, or all these kind of like other, which I kind of love. But even if even if for some reason you had to boost the childbirth rate, I think in Sparta, wasn't it, that ancient Greece, sort of it was considered that you could only have true love between men. But it was still necessary to do your thing and to have children. It was close your eyes and think of that nice boy.
I was going to say close your eyes and think of Ephialtes, but no.
Don't think of Ephialtes now. He's a
Poor dude. Poor dude. Not only can he not fight in the fight with the 300, he's also just not pretty enough to get a guy.
Yeah, that's why he betrayed him. He's basically the first fucking incel. I mean, there's a wonderful bit of, the wonderful bit of circular authoritarian logic when Stephen sort of sees a road worker who's putting up a sign saying, road closed, and he stops to remonstrate because he spelt the name of the village wrong.
Yes.
Spelt it wrong. It's Pinvin, not Pinfin. Guys, what do you think? Coffee, little shit.
Yeah.
But it's like, why can't we get through? Because the road's closed. Why is the road closed? So people can't get through.
Yeah.
But I mean, there's the sort of science fiction elements. I mean, one element of it that isn't maybe explored further. I mean, Arn, in one of his at the town hall at the village meeting, talks about this section of Fen where there's something going on under the ground. There's some sort of technocratic project going on. And there's the
government is testing something here.
Yeah. And there's an instant. I mean, the reason that road gets closed is because a young lad, him and his friends parked up there. He went off to have a pee and came staggering back horribly burned. And we never kind of quite find out what the end of that. And this is possibly one element of it that didn't quite.
It's one of those really strange things, because at the time that it first happened, when I was first watching it, I was like, is that a dream? Is he like?
Yeah,
it's like, is this like Stephen dreaming that the guy went off to have a slash in the, in the field and got struck by lightning because he was like super drunk or something?
He comes back talking about the man in the fire, which I suppose could refer to Penda, because when we see Penda at the end, he like appears out of the fire that destroys the sick, the so-called, what he refers to as the sick mother and father.
Yeah.
Which is another recurring, because I mean, you mentioned a scene where Stephen's holding forth in some authoritarian piece about some disgraceful play that's been, England, we're the most tolerant and open. We have freedom of speech, and we don't have censorship, but we've been saved from this filth being put in our homes by a court injunction, which is apparently not censorship and is not a restriction.
Yeah, court injunction, totally different from censorship.
Yes.
And also, I think that's supposed to be something that Arn wrote. Yeah,
I got that impression, definitely.
Yeah, it's a TV play about Jesus, about what is the real Jesus? What was the real Jesus? Sort of reminds me a lot of Jésus de Montréal, where basically it's a Denis Arcand film made in Quebec, where basically this bunch of actors get together none of them none of them have anything to do over the Easter season. And so one of them gets a bunch of his friends together and they do a passion play. The passion play that they create together turns out to be one that kind of questions the entire notion of Jesus. Which is a big deal in a super Catholic super Catholic province, but at the same time, Quebec is kind of super Catholic the way that Spain used to be super Catholic. Where you have you have the church, but then you have a whole bunch of people outside of the church going like, maybe, I don't know, I'm not sure. Anyway, but it's that kind of questioning of the notion of Jesus, questioning of,
and which he finds out that his father has also done.
Yes.
He goes through his father's papers and he finds out his father has attempted and abandoned a book called The Buried Jesus, where and there's enough of it there that Stephen is basically able to recognize that his father was basically had a kind of radical and liberationist view of Jesus of God. And he has a longer conversation with his father, and his father expounds on this, that Jesus was a revolutionary.
Here's a health to the rebel Jesus, as Elvis Costello might say.
But whose teachings have been co-opted and perverted by the doctrine, as he calls them, the doctrine mongers, who basically have drawn us away from that, and they crucify. And Jesus has. I mean, there's a bit near the end where Stephen is in the church and he plays the organ, and I was a little bit reminded of there's that scene in Carnival of Souls where she's going on she gets carried away on the organ, and at that point the authority figure of the priest basically says, "What the fuck are you doing? Go away! You know, you're sacked."
Yeah. Get out! You can't play carnival music in the church.
Which is an incredibly compassionate and Christian thing to do to someone who's clearly quite troubled. But there you go. But in Stephen's case, the figure who appears to him is actually Jesus, or at least Jesus' feet with a nail through them, basically calling on him to unbury me. You know, take me down, get me down from this tree.
Yeah, and it's also another thing that's kind of interesting and contradictory about it, or Manichaean, the word that keeps coming up again and again and again throughout the play, is that what he's playing is a piece of religious music. He's playing the Dream of Gerontius. You know, he's playing Elgar. It's just not a hymn, and inside of the Dream of Gerontius by Elgar, there is this moment that he seizes upon of dissonance, and he sort of grabs the dissonance and increases it and increases. I will fucking increase the thing. You know, it's like increases it and increases it until it becomes like a drone underneath everything, and a crack forms in the in the floor and just gets wider and wider and wider.
And the dissonance was, I mean, when he's discussing the Dream of Gerontius at the beginning, he says that dissonance is the moment where God's gaze falls upon Gerontius's soul. So again, the idea of dissonance, disruption, chaos, disobedience as something that is actually sacred. That if you want to look and find what is God, what is good, what is holy, you find it there in that which disrupts repressive systems of order and control,
which does not cooperate. What is a rebel? What is a revolutionary except a person who does not cooperate with the rules, questions the rules?
So I mean, finding that work of his father's is another, it's another one of his, he's got this whole sense of who he is. He's this, he's an Englishman. He's an English parson's son. He is.
I am a son of England. I am.
I tell you.
I tell you.
In a way, he actually. I mean, although he hasn't been beaten like one, he actually is a red-headed stepchild. In fact, but that's another one of those props that's knocked away his certainties of because certainly the Christianity that he subscribes to at the beginning is a very authoritarian Christianity. It's he talks about you see the figure of the man and the woman who kind of the hands clasped together, held aloft in victory, who
the true mother and father of England,
the sick mother and father, the true dark enemies of England is how Penda characterizes them.
That's right. But Stephen himself says these we can look on as the true mother and father of England, this mother and father who have managed to get this play banned. Sorry, not banned. We don't ban things.
No, but they appear three times. First in that photograph. Secondly, there's another visionary interlude shortly after he comes off his bike, where he this big stately house and all these children are kind of lining up to have their hands cut off. You can work out the symbolism of the sort of the way that youth is being like crippled in the mind kind of thing. And those two figures, the man and the come forward, kind of reaching out and beckoning him forward. And when he sees them at the end, I mean, they don't present themselves, they actually don't present themselves as Christians. They refer to the Christians as Christians, and if anything, they're kind of presenting themselves to him as if they are part of this paganism that that he's discovered within himself. But
they're almost identified with his dad talking about Joan of Arc. And saying that, maybe Joan of Arc was not even a Christian. Maybe Joan of Arc was hearkening back to an older version of like a village religion.
It's interesting looking at some of Rudkin's stage work. There's a play of his, The Triumph of Death, which revolves around a community of survivors of the Children's Crusade who form their own kind of paganistic society in the woods of a nobleman's estate until, of course, they are found and dragged back into the real world, not very pleasantly.
No.
But their lord is basically the Joan of Arc figure is Jihan. And she's told she's renamed, she's rechristened Joan when she's being, when you get into the second half, when she's basically been taken out of the forest, they're talking to her, and the language, instead of being that of the Inquisition, is very much that of, the modern therapeutic environment, but it still ends with her being burned at the stake. But when she encounters the Lord, who is actually the nobleman in disguise, who goes on the run at the end, he basically says, she's about to call him by name. Only those who love me most at the moment of their dying can call me that. And so when she's burned and she sees the master in the crowd, she cries out, "Jesus!" And you realise that's who she's been. Although he appears more like Pan when he's like got his the Lord costume on. There's this whole, there, as well as her, there's also there's the Joan of Arc theme, but there's also a figure in it called Mother Manus. You have a monstrous kind of like Pope figure called Papatrix, permanently perched on the phone trying to shit. And Mother Manus is this sort of female attendant who, and funnily enough, in fact, because of course this play revolves around the Children's Crusade, she at the beginning of it, there was an encounter between Jesus and the lad who started the Children's Crusade, Stephen of Cloyes.
Right.
And when Jesus exhorts him to love me and basically love others, and Mother Manus comes along and says, yes, but what did he mean by that? We've got to find what the meaning that is right for you. And she basically inspires him to go and start the Children's Crusade. And you hear the children screaming and being burned off stage, and she screams, "Children, rejoice! You turn to light," which is what the woman says to Stephen. When we turn to light.
Yes.
And that thing on top of the hill where they're talking, it's basically the temptation in the wilderness.
It is very much the temptation in the wilderness. They refer to him essentially as Christ. They refer to him as the Savior. They refer to him as, a child who is born to save the world, to nurture the seed of light inside of everybody.
Well, it goes back to the theme that, the Manichaean theme that his father states is the idea that Jesus was just one of a number of sons of light.
Yes.
Who and there's a reference when he talks about Penda's defeat, what dark old son of light went down when Penda fell.
That's right.
So the idea of these figures who emerge, whose purpose is to preserve and encourage the spark of light within humankind against the forces of darkness. And
what's interesting, though, is that they almost seem Gnostic to me. They seem like people who hate the body. They seem like people who, think that the world is an awful, dark place. The flesh is, something that we're trapped in, and so it's great if our flesh is destroyed.
Yes,
and we turn to light.
I am mixed. I am mud and flame.
Yes.
So it's
and mud, like clay, is flesh.
Yeah, exactly.
It's all the fleshy things, the fleshly pleasures that Elgar talks about when he sees Elgar. He has a vision of really old Elgar.
He tells him the secret of the enigma theme as well.
Yes, that's
but
right.
We don't get to hear what it is.
No, we don't get to hear it. Although, given that he refers to they don't have enough of the demon in them. Who knows? Maybe it might be the the Black Mass theme that Scriabin has.
Of course, demon can have two meanings here. It can be the demon in the devil sense, or it can be the demon as in a spirit of kind of
place.
like a demi. Yeah,
daemon.
Exactly.
And I do, again, pagan as in of the village, in the village rooted in the landscape. Then therefore Penda is the daemon of Pinvin.
Yeah.
Which used to be Pendafen, which used to be Penda's Fen.
I believe this is actually a real place. The interview that there's on the interview that the little featurette, the making of thing that accompanies the Blu-ray I've got, Rudkin talks about the inspiration being from a street sign referring to, which spelled it as Pinfin instead of Pinvin, which got him thinking, is that like a Welshman? Because of course in Wales the F is pronounced as a hard V.
That's right.
And he discovered it had been called Pinvin, and a bit earlier it had been called Pendafen. So I think I don't know if he made up the etymology of it being Penda, the last sort of pagan king of England, but the last pagan English pagan king, I should say. He didn't,
of the Midlands.
Yeah, Mercia, I think it was, as it was called then. But yeah, so I think I've lost my thread slightly here. Where were we?
We were talking about etymology.
Yes.
We were talking about Penda being the daemon of Pinvin.
Yeah.
You know, and also that he's, you know, supposedly, Stephen says, did Penda die here, Dad? Which would make him like a seed buried in the earth.
Yeah.
Something to be rediscovered, something to be resurrected.
Well, his father says, you know, who knows, who's to say that he died? Although I was watching it for the second time today with Kate, and she said, well, time. But I did find out if you could believe in God, if you could believe in Jesus, then you can possibly believe in a pagan king surviving for nearly 1,000 years after he was supposed to have carked it. You know, these things are, you know, you should be able to get your head around the concept,
or just you know, Penda as an inspiration, as a figure of inspiration. You know, it's I can be like this, the same way that you could be like Jesus, right?
Yeah, it's the whole thing of the sons of light, of being in that. But I mean, the irony is that being the son of light doesn't mean being pure light. It is about that mixture. It is about understanding that synthesis of those things, and those two, the man and the woman, the sick mother and father, who would have as children forever, as Penda calls them. They're very much there, like that character in The Triumph of Death, Mother Marnus, is there to essentially locate this kind of potentially revolutionary, potentially disruptive force, and kind of shackle it, tame it, channel it into a socially acceptable thing that will and
to turn it into something that can be sacrificed, to turn it into a figure of sacrifice. I mean, if we think of, you know, when he says, you know, take me down off this tree, you know, the fact that we only see Jesus as at the moment of his suffering and death, as opposed to the moment of his rebirth, as opposed to the moment of, you know, his resurrection, you know, that we're constantly thinking about his suffering and death, and not the most important thing that he did, which was not so much to
die, but to come back.
Yes, exactly.
Although, of course, that's arguably harder to represent in a simple thing you can hang around your neck. Well, I think we've referred before to the Bill Hicks thing of, you know, do you think if Jesus comes back, he's ever going to want to see another fucking cross?
Probably not.
Really, it's like, I think Hicks compared it to going up to Jackie Onassis with like a little rifle, going, thinking of John, thinking of John.
It's true.
Same kind of thing. But yeah, I don't know if it's a coincidence, but the woman, you know, who's in this sort of like the pink suit, the pink coat and hat. I don't know if there was I'm very surprised if there wasn't an intention to evoke a resemblance to Mary Whitehouse, who I don't know if she's familiar to. No, she was a notorious puritanical busybodying arsewit. She spent basically a great deal of time in the 60s, 70s, and 80s campaigning to have stuff banned that she didn't approve of.
Absolutely.
Clean up TV, you know, get this filth off our screens. There's a very good essay by Ramsey Campbell, in Ramsey Campbell, probably called "Turn Off," where he describes attending a meeting in his area and how much, you know, how much control was exercised over it by her and her people. You know, if you didn't agree with her, you were very quickly shut down, and very quickly, you know, had your order to, you know, restrict yourself to one simple question, whereas people who agreed that, of course, could go on and on and on till the cows came home.
Of course.
So yeah, she was very I think it's very. I mean, she was pretty much the bane of any certainly playwrights in the 60s and 70s who were trying to write stuff that was kind of like challenging taboos and repressive.
Yeah.
You know,
So
sort of
this idea that, you know, to become a savior is to become a sacrificial figure, and the best thing that you can do for other people is to die. You know, not to live, but to die.
Yeah.
And Penda, on the other hand, seems to represent a kind of, you know, like you live past that moment of your death. You become an adult, not just a child, but an adult. And there's so much, as you say, there's like so much going on in it. If I had one criticism of Penda's Fen, is that it would be that I think it could have used another half an hour, because some of the contortions they don't come out of nowhere. You're like, okay, so I guess in a scene that I was not allowed to see, the X happened, you know. But
it's kind of like you don't get. I mean, you see kind of like the revelation about his sexuality and stuff.
Yeah.
But it's really quickly move on from there. We don't have, you feel like there may be a little more time to see him reacting to it.
Yeah.
But it's very it's very tightly disciplined material there. Arguably a little bit, possibly a bit too tightened for its own good. Another thing that interests me is that of course, a lot of the danger with anything. I mean, I suspect Rudkin would probably resist the categorization of Penda's Fen as folk horror, but I think by default it certainly goes into that territory. It certainly
in the way that folk horror crosses over with the numinous, you know, those moments of realization and those visions that he has, you know, be they you know, the dream that he describes, and then the dream he has. You know, it's like, I had a dream where, you know, I saw a demon, but then I turned him into an angel, and then I realized I could turn him back into a demon, you know. And then we actually, through the power of my will, by focusing the power of my will, because I'm so, you know, powerful.
I'm so in control of my own.
Yes. And then with the dream about Honeybone, we realized, no, you're not in control of your will
you're
at
in
all.
Control of, you're not in control of jack shit here.
Jack and shit are the two things that you're in control of,
yes,
Stephen.
You want to play with Honeybone, basically.
Well, that's true, but I also find it interesting that, you know, when that moment of sleep paralysis where he wakes and the demon is on his chest, he strokes the demon the same way that he strokes Honeybone.
Well, for an instant, when he wakes up, he sees a face.
Yeah.
And I don't think it's Honeybone's. I think it's Joel's, the milk.
I think it is Joel's face. Yeah.
And that perhaps prompts him to. So there's that kind of.
One way or the other, you know, it's like you can't be Manichaean about it. You can't be absolute light, absolute darkness, because there's darkness inside your light and there's light inside your darkness. And the thing that you find most horrifying contains an element of what you are attracted to, and vice versa.
And tune in at the same time next week for the final part of this discussion. What did you think of this evening's episode? Please let us know in the comments. If you enjoyed it, tell your friends and ask them to subscribe as well. Until then, I have been Simon Bestwick.
And I remain Gemma Files.
And
this of course, was
No Darkness
But Ours.